The fine arrived on a Wednesday morning, 2 weeks after the worst blizzard in Colorado history had buried Denver under 4 feet of snow in less than 6 hours. And I knew immediately that Patricia Henderson had finally found her perfect weapon against me. My name is Marcus Hartman, and I had been living in the Meadowbrook Heights subdivision for exactly 11 months when that envelope showed up in my mailbox. The fine was for $2,000. $2,000 for failing to shovel my driveway and walkway within the required 24 hours after a snowfall, as stipulated in our HOA bylaws section 7.3.2. The problem was that during those 24 hours, the National Weather Service had issued a complete travel ban. Police were literally arresting people for being on the roads. Visibility had been zero. The governor had declared a state of emergency. And Patricia Henderson, president of the Meadowbrook Heights HOA, had apparently been sitting in her living room with a timer and a camera, waiting for me to violate a rule that was physically impossible to follow. I stood there in my kitchen, staring at the paper in disbelief. The fine notice was printed on official HOA letterhead, complete with our neighborhood logo of a stylized mountain and pine tree. Patricia's signature sat at the bottom in aggressive blue ink, and below that was a photograph. She had actually included photographic evidence. The picture showed my house during the whiteout, though you could barely make out the structure through the wall of white. My driveway was buried, sure, but so was everyone else's. The entire neighborhood had been an impassable winter hellscape. I pulled out my phone and called my neighbor, Tom Richards. He answered on the third ring. "Please tell me you got one of these fines too," I said. "One of what?" Tom sounded confused. "A fine from the HOA for not shoveling during the blizzard." There was a pause. "No, man. I didn't shovel either. Nobody did. It was literally illegal to go outside." That settled it. Patricia was targeting me specifically, and this was just the latest escalation in a war that had been brewing since the day I moved in. It had started innocuously enough. I had painted my front door a deep navy blue instead of the approved forest green. I honestly had not known about the color restriction. The previous owners had a green door, and I had assumed I could change it when I moved in. Patricia had shown up on my doorstep 3 days after I finished painting, her short blonde hair perfectly styled despite the morning hour, holding a printed copy of the HOA bylaws with the offending passage highlighted in yellow. "Mr. Hartman, I'm Patricia Henderson, HOA president," she had said, not offering her hand. "Your door is in violation of our community standards." I had apologized, explained I did not know, and promised to fix it. But that was not enough for Patricia. She wanted a written apology submitted to the HOA board. She wanted photographic evidence of the correction. She wanted it done within 72 hours. The way she spoke to me, like I was a child who had deliberately broken a rule, set my teeth on edge, but I complied. I repainted the door forest green, submitted my photos, and thought that was the end of it. Then came the garbage can incident. I had left my trash bins visible from the street on a non-collection day. Fine number 1, $300. Then my grass was allegedly a 1/4 inch too tall. Fine number 2, $500. Then I had holiday lights up 3 days past the January 5th deadline. Fine number 3, $400. Each time I was the only person in the neighborhood being cited, even though I could see at least 6 other houses with identical violations. I had tried reasoning with Patricia directly, but she refused to meet with me one-on-one. I had attended HOA board meetings, but she controlled the entire board. The other members, Linda Wu and Robert Chen, just nodded along with whatever Patricia said. I had even consulted with a lawyer, but he had told me that fighting HOA fines was expensive and rarely successful. His advice was to either comply perfectly or move. I did not want to move. Despite Patricia's harassment, I loved my house. It was a beautiful 3-bedroom ranch with a mountain view, and I had gotten it at a good price. The neighborhood was quiet, the schools were excellent, and my commute to my job as a software engineer in downtown Denver was reasonable. Moving would cost tens of thousands of dollars and admit defeat to a petty tyrant. But $2,000 for not shoveling during a state of emergency crossed a line. I called the law office of Sarah Mitchell, an attorney who specialized in HOA disputes. I had found her website months ago during one of my previous fine incidents, but had not pulled the trigger on hiring her. This time, I was ready. "Mr. Hartman, I have been waiting for your call," Sarah said when her secretary put me through. Her voice was warm but professional. "I've heard about Patricia Henderson and Meadowbrook Heights. You're not the first person from your neighborhood to contact me." "Really?" That surprised me. Really. Though most people end up not pursuing action because the HOA backs down once they know legal representation is involved. "But from what you're describing, this fine is particularly egregious. Can you send me all the documentation?" I spent the next hour scanning and emailing every piece of paper Patricia had ever sent me. The original fine notices, the photographs she had taken of my alleged violations, copies of the HOA bylaws she claimed I was violating, and most importantly, documentation of the blizzard conditions during the time I was supposedly required to shovel. Sarah called me back that evening. "Marcus, I think we have a strong case here. What Patricia is doing is not just unreasonable, it's potentially illegal. HOA boards have to act in good faith and treat all residents equally. The selective enforcement you're describing could constitute harassment. And this snow shoveling fine is particularly absurd given the weather conditions. So, what do? First, we formally dispute the fine. I'll draft a letter citing the emergency conditions and the impossibility of compliance. Second, we request a formal hearing with the HOA board, which is your right under Colorado law. Third, if they don't back down, we consider a lawsuit for harassment and improper governance. How much is this going to cost me? Let's start with the dispute letter and hearing. That's a flat fee of $1,500. If we proceed to a lawsuit, we'll discuss costs then. But Marcus, here's the thing. If we can prove harassment and improper conduct, you might be able to recover your attorney fees plus damages for all those previous fines." I authorized her to proceed. Sarah's dispute letter arrived at Patricia's house via certified mail 3 days later. I know because Patricia showed up at my door within 2 hours of signing for it, her face flushed red, her eyes blazing. "How dare you bring a lawyer into this?" she hissed at me through my screen door. I had learned not to open the door fully when Patricia came calling. "How dare you fine me $2,000 for not shoveling during a state of emergency?" I replied calmly. "The bylaws are clear. 24 hours after snowfall ends, all driveways and walkways must be cleared. You violated that bylaw. Patricia, it was literally illegal to go outside. The police were arresting people." "That's not my problem. Rules are rules, Marcus. If you can't follow them, maybe this neighborhood isn't right for you. I'm not paying the fine, and I'm not going anywhere." Her eyes narrowed. "We'll see about that." She turned and marched back to her house, which was directly across the street from mine. I watched her go, noting the way she pulled out her phone the moment she was off my property. She was probably calling the other board members, or maybe her own lawyer. The formal hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks later, to be held at the community center on Pinewood Drive. Sarah advised me to gather as much evidence as possible about the weather conditions during the blizzard. That was when I got the idea about the meteorologist. I had gone to college with a guy named David Preston, who now worked as a meteorologist for a local Denver news station. We had not been close friends, but we had kept in touch via social media. I sent him a message explaining my situation. His response came back within an hour. "Dude, this is insane. I literally did a whole segment about how dangerous that blizzard was and why people needed to stay inside. I'd be happy to help. What do you need? Would you be willing to testify at an HOA hearing about the weather conditions? Or at least provide some kind of expert statement?" Absolutely. That blizzard was no joke. We had whiteout conditions for 6 straight hours. Visibility was less than 10 feet. Wind gusts up to 70 miles per hour. Snow falling at rates of 4 to 6 inches per hour. Going outside during that wasn't just inadvisable, it was genuinely life-threatening. I'll put together a full report for you. 3 days later, David emailed me a comprehensive document detailing every aspect of the blizzard. He included National Weather Service warnings, radar imagery, visibility reports, temperature data, wind speed measurements, and photographs from around Denver showing the conditions. He also included news footage from that day showing stranded vehicles, collapsed buildings from snow weight, and interviews with emergency services personnel begging people to stay inside. At the bottom of the report, David had written a summary in plain language. During the period of January 15th, from approximately 2 p.m. to 8 p.m., weather conditions in the Denver metropolitan area, including the Meadowbrook Heights subdivision, made any outdoor activity not only inadvisable but dangerous and potentially fatal. Visibility was reduced to near zero in whiteout conditions. Snow accumulation rates exceeded the ability of any individual to clear walkways faster than they were reburied. Wind chill temperatures dropped to minus 30 degrees Fahrenheit. Multiple deaths were reported across the region from people who became disoriented and suffered exposure. Any requirement to shovel snow during this period would have been impossible to fulfill safely or effectively. Sarah was thrilled when I sent her the report. "This is perfect, Marcus." With expert testimony from a professional meteorologist, Patricia's find becomes laughable. No reasonable person could argue you should have been outside during those conditions. The 3 weeks until the hearing passed slowly. Patricia continued her campaign of surveillance and harassment. She sent me 2 more notices, one for having a package visible on my porch for more than 24 hours, and another for parking my car on the street overnight, which apparently violated some obscure bylaw I had never heard of. I documented everything and forwarded it all to Sarah. "She's digging herself deeper," Sarah said. "The more she harasses you, the stronger our case becomes if we do end up in court." The night before the hearing, I barely slept. I kept running through potential arguments and counter-arguments in my head. Sarah had prepared me well, but I was still nervous. Patricia had home court advantage. She controlled the board, she knew the bylaws inside and out, and she was apparently willing to bend or break any rule to get what she wanted. The community center meeting room was set up like a small courtroom when I arrived with Sarah the next evening. A long table at the front held 3 chairs for the board members. Rows of folding chairs faced the table for residents who wanted to observe. A single chair sat to the side, presumably for me. Patricia was already there, dressed in a severe black suit, her hair pulled back tightly. Linda Wu and Robert Chen sat on either side of her, looking uncomfortable. About a dozen other neighborhood residents had shown up, apparently having heard about the dispute. I recognized Tom Richards and waved. He gave me a supportive nod. Patricia called the meeting to order at exactly 7 o'clock. She went through some standard HOA business first, approving minutes from the previous meeting and discussing an upcoming neighborhood garage sale. Then she turned her attention to me. Next item on the agenda: the appeal of Marcus Hartman regarding fine notice 2024-047, issued for violation of bylaw 7.3.2, failure to maintain cleared walkways and driveway within required time period following snowfall. Sarah stood up. Madam President, before we begin, I'd like to clarify the format of this hearing. My client is entitled to present evidence and witnesses in his defense. Will this be permitted? Patricia's jaw tightened. This is an informal hearing, Miss Mitchell. We don't need to turn it into a circus. With respect, Colorado law requires HOA boards to provide due process when a homeowner disputes a fine. That includes the right to present evidence. If you refuse to allow that, we'll have grounds to immediately challenge any decision you make in court. The other board members shifted nervously. Robert Chen whispered something to Patricia. She frowned but nodded. Fine. Present your evidence. Sarah opened her briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. Let's start with the basic facts. On January 15, 2024, a historic blizzard struck the Denver area. The National Weather Service issued a blizzard warning at 1 p.m., which was upgraded to a whiteout warning at 2:15 p.m. At 2:47 p.m., the Colorado State Patrol announced a complete travel ban for the entire Denver metro area. At 3:30 p.m., Governor Peterson declared a state of emergency. These are all matters of public record. She passed copies of the weather warnings and emergency declarations to the board members. Patricia barely glanced at them. At 4:15 p.m., Sarah continued, the Denver Police Department announced that anyone found outside or traveling during the blizzard would be subject to arrest for their own safety. Multiple people died during this storm from exposure after becoming disoriented in whiteout conditions. The blizzard continued with full intensity until approximately 8 p.m. that evening. By that time, 4 feet of snow had accumulated across the region. What's your point, counselor? Patricia interrupted. The snow stopped at 8 p.m. on January 15th. The bylaw requires cleared walkways within 24 hours. That means Mr. Hartman had until 8 p.m. on January 16th to shovel. He did not complete shoveling until January 17th. That's a violation. My point, Sarah said calmly, is that compliance was impossible. But let me bring in an expert to explain exactly why. David Preston had been waiting in the hallway. Sarah had arranged for him to arrive a bit late to make a bigger impression, and it worked. When he walked in, several residents recognized him from the local news. Patricia's face went pale as she realized what was happening. This is Dr. David Preston, Sarah announced. He's a meteorologist with Channel 7 News and holds a doctorate in atmospheric sciences from the University of Colorado. He's here to provide expert testimony about the weather conditions during the relevant time period. David took the chair and looked completely at ease. He had done hundreds of on-camera appearances and was used to explaining complex weather phenomena to regular people. Dr. Preston, Sarah began, can you describe the weather conditions in the Meadowbrook Heights area on January 15th and 16th? Certainly. January 15th saw what meteorologists call a bombogenesis event, or bomb cyclone. A rapidly intensifying low-pressure system combined with an atmospheric river of moisture to create one of the most intense blizzards in Colorado history. During the peak of the storm, from approximately 2 p.m. to 8 p.m. on the 15th, conditions were extreme. Visibility dropped to less than 5 feet. Snow was falling at rates exceeding 6 inches per hour. Wind gusts reached 75 miles per hour, creating massive snowdrifts. The combination of heavy snow, high winds, and low visibility created whiteout conditions where people literally could not see their hands in front of their faces. He paused and looked directly at Patricia. During those conditions, going outside was not just difficult or inadvisable, it was potentially fatal. We documented 17 deaths across Colorado that day from people who became disoriented in the whiteout and suffered exposure. But what about January 16th? Patricia interjected. The storm ended on the 15th. David nodded. The heavy snowfall ended around 8 p.m. on the 15th, but conditions remained extremely hazardous. Overnight temperatures dropped to -20 degrees with wind chills approaching -40. High winds continued, creating blowing and drifting snow that reduced visibility and made any snow clearing efforts futile. You could shovel your driveway and have it completely filled in again within minutes. Furthermore, he continued, the snow depth of 4 feet created dangerous conditions. People were at risk of getting stuck or trapped in the snow. Throughout the 16th, emergency services were still in recovery mode, focusing on rescuing stranded motorists and clearing main roads. Most residential streets, including those in Meadowbrook Heights, were not plowed until late on the 16th or early on the 17th. Even if someone had wanted to shovel their driveway on the 16th, they would have had nowhere to put that snow except back into an unplowed street. Sarah pulled out blown-up photographs from David's report. The images showed the complete devastation of the blizzard. One photo showed a car buried up to its roof in snow. Another showed a collapsed carport. A third showed a person standing in snow that came up to their chest. These photos were taken in the Meadowbrook Heights area on January 16th, Sarah said, passing them to the board members. As you can see, expecting anyone to have fully cleared their driveway and walkway under these conditions is not reasonable. Patricia's face had gone from pale to red. The bylaws don't have an exception for weather. Rules are rules. Actually, Sarah said, pulling out another document, Colorado state law includes a provision about impossibility of performance. When circumstances make it physically impossible to comply with a contract or regulation, that failure to comply is excused. I have case law here supporting this principle. She placed several legal documents in front of the board. More importantly, the HOA's own bylaws include a provision about acting in good faith and using reasonable judgment. Fining a resident for failing to do something that was literally impossible is not reasonable judgment. It's harassment. Harassment! Patricia stood up, her voice rising. How dare you accuse this board of harassment? We're enforcing the rules equally for everyone. Are you? Sarah pulled out another folder. Because I have documentation here of 23 separate violations of various bylaws by other residents in this neighborhood over the past year. Violations that were photographed and reported to the HOA but resulted in no fines. Meanwhile, Mr. Hartman has been fined 6 times in 11 months. She spread photographs across the table. Houses with off-color front doors, garbage cans left out, grass that was too long. Holiday lights up past deadlines, cars parked on streets, every single thing I had been fined for being done by other residents. Tom Richards didn't shovel his driveway until January 18th. No fine. Jennifer Martinez still had Christmas lights up on January 10th. No fine. Robert Chen himself parked on the street overnight 4 times in November. No fine. This isn't equal enforcement. This is targeted harassment of my client. Robert Chen's face went red when his name was mentioned. He looked down at the table. Linda Wu cleared her throat. Patricia, is this true? Did we not find these other residents? There may have been some oversights, Patricia stammered. We can't possibly catch every violation. But you caught every single violation by Mr. Hartman, Sarah pressed, including taking photographs during a whiteout blizzard to document his snow removal failure. That's not an oversight. That's targeted enforcement. The room had gone completely silent. The residents watching from the folding chairs were riveting, several of them nodding along with Sarah's arguments. Patricia tried to regain control. This hearing is about one specific fine for one specific violation. Everything else is irrelevant. Actually, it's completely relevant, Sarah countered, because it establishes a pattern of harassment and biased enforcement. But let's focus on this specific fine. Dr. Preston, in your professional opinion as a meteorologist, was it possible for a homeowner in Meadowbrook Heights to safely and effectively clear their driveway and walkway between 8 p.m. on January 15th and 8 p.m. on January 16th? David shook his head firmly. Absolutely not. It would have been dangerous to attempt it, and even if someone had tried, the conditions would have made it impossible to maintain a cleared surface. The wind and blowing snow would have refilled any cleared area within minutes. No reasonable person would have expected someone to go outside in those conditions. Thank you, Dr. Preston. Sarah turned back to the board. I move that this fine be dismissed entirely and that Mr. Hartman be issued a formal apology for this unreasonable penalty. Patricia looked like she wanted to explode, but Robert Chen spoke up first. I think we need to discuss this as a board. Can we take a 15-minute recess? Sarah nodded. Of course. The board members retreated to a small office off the main room. Through the door, I could hear raised voices. Patricia was clearly arguing with the other two, but I could not make out specific words. Tom Richards came over and shook my hand. Man, that was intense. I had no idea Patricia was targeting you like that. Those pictures of all the other violations. I should have said something before. It's not your fault, I said. Patricia is good at making it seem reasonable. Each individual fine didn't seem that crazy. It's only when you look at the pattern that you see what she's really doing. Other residents came over too, sharing their own stories of interactions with Patricia. Apparently, she had been aggressive and controlling since being elected HOA president 2 years ago, but most people just tried to stay off her radar. I was the first person to really push back. After 20 minutes, not 15, the board members returned. Robert and Linda looked somewhat relieved. Patricia looked furious. Robert spoke first. After reviewing the evidence presented, particularly the expert testimony from Dr. Preston, the board has decided to dismiss fine 2024-047. Mr. Hartman, you are not required to pay the $2,000 penalty. I felt a wave of relief wash over me, but Sarah was not done. And what about the 5 previous fines that were issued based on the same pattern of selective enforcement? Patricia found her voice. Those fines were for legitimate violations and have already been paid. This matter is closed. Actually, Sarah said, Mr. Hartman paid those fines under duress, believing he had no choice. Given what we've now established about the HOA's pattern of selective enforcement and harassment, we'll be seeking reimbursement for those fines as well. Additionally, we'll be requesting Mr. Hartman's attorney fees for having to defend against this baseless snow removal fine. Linda Wu looked at Patricia nervously. Can they do that? Colorado law allows for recovery of attorney fees in HOA disputes where the board's actions are found to be unreasonable or in bad faith, Sarah explained. Between the selective enforcement, the harassment, and this absurd fine issued despite a state of emergency, I believe we have a strong case. Patricia's hands were shaking. "This hearing is over. The board will take the additional requests under advisement." "You have 30 days to respond," Sarah said. "If we don't receive a satisfactory response, we'll file a lawsuit in Denver County Court." And Miss Henderson, I should mention that if we do proceed to court, we'll be seeking not just reimbursement but additional damages for the emotional distress and harassment my client has suffered. We'll also be requesting a full audit of the HOA's enforcement practices and potentially seeking your removal as board president. The threat hung in the air. Patricia gathered her papers and left without another word, her heels clicking sharply on the community center floor. Over the next week, I waited anxiously for the board's response. Sarah had explained that they would probably try to negotiate something, but it was also possible that Patricia would dig in and force us to go to court. The response came in the form of a phone call from Robert Chen. He asked if he could meet with me privately, without Patricia present. I agreed and invited him to a coffee shop in a neutral location. Robert looked tired when he sat down across from me. He ordered a black coffee and rubbed his face. "Marcus, I want to apologize. I've known for a while that Patricia was being too aggressive with enforcement, especially toward you. But I didn't speak up because it was easier to just go along with her. That was wrong of me." "Why is she so fixated on me?" I asked. "I've never done anything to her personally." Robert sighed. "Honestly, I think it's because you pushed back. Most people in the neighborhood just comply with whatever Patricia wants, even when she's being unreasonable. You're the first person who questioned her authority and didn't just roll over. She took it as a personal challenge. That's insane." "Yeah, it is. Look, Linda and I have been talking. We want to resolve this without going to court. We're prepared to refund all of your previous fines, a total of $1,200, plus reimburse your attorney fees for the hearing." Sarah sent us a bill for $1,500, which we'll pay. That's $2,700 total, plus the $2,000 fine that got dismissed. I'm sure Patricia is thrilled about that, Robert grimaced. "Patricia doesn't actually know we're making this offer. Linda and I have enough votes to approve it without her consent. We're going to present it as a done deal at the next board meeting. She's not going to like it, but there's nothing she can do about it." "And what about Patricia's behavior going forward?" "I don't want this to turn into a never-ending war where she finds new ways to harass me. That's the other thing. Linda and I are calling for a special election to replace the board president. We're going to cite Patricia's mismanagement and the legal liability she's created for the HOA. With any luck, she'll be removed from the board entirely within the next couple of months." I was surprised. "You can do that. The bylaws allow for a special election if 2/3 of the homeowners petition for it. Linda and I have already started gathering signatures." After that hearing where Sarah laid out all the evidence of selective enforcement, we've had a lot of people volunteering to sign. People are tired of Patricia's control freak behavior. What happens to the HOA if she's removed? Do you and Linda want to run things? Robert shook his head. Honestly, we both want off the board too. This whole thing has been exhausting. We'll probably need to find entirely new board members, but that's a problem for later. Right now, the priority is resolving your case and preventing any further harassment. I called Sarah after the meeting and relayed everything Robert had said. She was pleased but cautious. Get everything in writing, she advised. I don't trust Patricia not to interfere somehow. But if the other board members are serious about removing her, that's the best possible outcome for you and for the neighborhood. The formal settlement offer arrived by certified mail 3 days later. It was signed by Robert Chen and Linda Wu, though notably not by Patricia Henderson. The terms were exactly as Robert had described. full refund of all previous fines, reimbursement of attorney fees, and a formal written apology for the improper fine during the blizzard. I signed the agreement and returned it. The check arrived 1 week later, drawn on the HOA's general account for $2,700. Meanwhile, the petition for Patricia's removal was making rapid progress. Tom Richards stopped by my house to tell me he had signed it and that most of the neighbors he had talked to were eager to sign as well. People are coming out of the woodwork with stories about Patricia, Tom said. Apparently, she's been tyrannical with everyone, not just you. You're just the first person who actually fought back. The special election was scheduled for 6 weeks after the hearing. During that time, Patricia tried to maintain her authority, but her power was clearly waning. She sent out a neighborhood email defending her record and accusing me and my attorney of creating a hostile environment in Meadowbrook Heights. The email backfired spectacularly. Several residents replied, all with their own stories of Patricia's unreasonable behavior and arbitrary rule enforcement. One particularly damning email came from an older resident named Margaret Foster, who had lived in Meadowbrook Heights since the neighborhood was built 20 years ago. Patricia Henderson has been the most divisive and damaging HOA president in our neighborhood's history, Margaret wrote. She has twisted the rules to suit her personal vendettas, created an atmosphere of fear and surveillance, and made many of us feel like prisoners in our own homes. The HOA was supposed to protect our property values and maintain community standards, not serve as Patricia's personal fiefdom. I fully support her removal from the board. The email chain went on for days, with dozens of residents sharing similar sentiments. Even people I had never met came forward with stories. Patricia had apparently fined one family for having too many cars in their driveway when their adult children came to visit for Thanksgiving. She had threatened another resident with legal action for planting flowers that were not on the approved list. She had sent nasty letters to several people about minor cosmetic issues with their homes that did not actually violate any bylaws. By the time the special election arrived, Patricia's fate was sealed. She did not even bother to show up at the meeting. The vote was 127-3 in favor of her removal. Linda Wu was appointed interim president, and a search began for new board members who would take a more reasonable approach to HOA governance. I thought that was the end of the story. I was wrong. 2 weeks after Patricia's removal, I was working from home when I heard shouting outside. I looked out my window and saw Patricia standing in my driveway, holding what appeared to be a can of spray paint. My heart sank. I grabbed my phone and started recording as I walked outside. "Patricia, what are you doing?" She spun around, and I could immediately tell something was off. Her hair was disheveled, her eyes were wild, and she was breathing heavily. "You ruined everything," she screamed at me. "I worked for 2 years to make this neighborhood perfect. I enforced the rules. I kept property values high. And you destroyed it all because you couldn't follow simple instructions. Patricia, you need to calm down. Why don't you go home? This is my home. I've lived here for 5 years. You're the outsider. You're the one who doesn't belong." She raised the spray paint can and pointed it at my car, which was parked in the driveway. I realized she was planning to vandalize it. "Patricia, don't do that. Put the can down and go home. You're just making things worse for yourself." "Worse? How could things possibly be worse?" I lost my position. "I'm humiliated. Everyone in the neighborhood hates me, and it's all your fault." She shook the spray paint can and moved toward my car. I knew I needed to de-escalate the situation. "Patricia, I didn't make you target me with unreasonable fines. I didn't make you selectively enforce the rules. Those were your choices. You could have been fair. You could have worked with people instead of against them. But you chose to be a tyrant, and now you're facing the consequences. I was protecting our home values, she shrieked. Every time someone breaks a rule, it makes the whole neighborhood look bad. Don't you understand that? There's a difference between reasonable enforcement and harassment, Patricia. You cross that line over and over again. And you know what? You still haven't even told me why you had such a problem with me specifically. What did I ever do to you? She paused, the spray paint can still in her hand, trembling. For a moment, I thought she might actually answer the question honestly. You looked down on me, she finally said, her voice dropping. That first day when I came to your door about the door color, you smiled at me like I was some ridiculous busybody, like the rules didn't matter, like I didn't matter. I was taken aback. Patricia, I smiled because I was trying to be friendly. I apologized immediately. I fixed the door. I did everything you asked. But you didn't respect me. None of you respect me. You all think I'm just some petty tyrant who enjoys pushing people around, but someone has to enforce the rules. Someone has to maintain standards. If we let everyone do whatever they want, this neighborhood would fall apart. Nobody is saying there shouldn't be rules, Patricia, but the rules have to be applied fairly and reasonably. You can't fine someone for not shoveling during a whiteout blizzard. That's not maintaining standards, that's just cruelty. Her hand dropped slightly, and I saw tears starting to form in her eyes. The rage was draining away, replaced by something else. Desperation, maybe, or exhaustion. I just wanted to do a good job, she whispered. I wanted people to see that I could lead, that I could make a difference. You could have done that by being fair and kind, I said gently. People would have respected you if you had worked with them instead of against them. It's not too late to change, Patricia. You can apologize to people. You can move forward differently. She looked at me for a long moment, then down at the spray paint can in her hand. Slowly, she set it on the ground. I'm sorry, she said quietly. I'm sorry for everything. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I am sorry. She turned and walked back toward her house across the street. I picked up the spray paint can and noticed it was locked, not actually usable. She had been bluffing or had been too distraught to figure out how to use it. Either way, I was relieved the confrontation had not escalated further. I called Tom Richards and told him what had happened. He advised me to file a police report just to have documentation in case Patricia tried anything else. I reluctantly agreed and called the non-emergency line. An officer came out an hour later, took my statement and the video I had recorded, and went to speak with Patricia. He came back to my house 20 minutes later. Mr. Hartman, Miss Henderson is clearly going through some kind of mental health crisis. She was very emotional and somewhat incoherent when I spoke with her. She admitted to coming over here with the spray paint, but said she wasn't actually going to use it. Given that the can was locked and that she left when you asked her to, I'm not going to file criminal charges at this time. However, I'm going to recommend she get some help, and I'm documenting this incident. If she approaches you or your property again, call us immediately. I thanked the officer and spent the rest of the day feeling unsettled. I had wanted Patricia held accountable for her harassment, but I had not wanted to destroy her psychologically. The person I had seen in my driveway was not a tyrannical HOA president. She was a broken, desperate woman who had wrapped her entire identity around a position of petty power and had no idea how to cope with losing it. Over the next few weeks, I kept an eye on Patricia's house from my window. She rarely left. Her car stayed parked in her garage. Her curtains remained closed. I heard from Tom that she had put her house up for sale. She told her realtor she can't live here anymore, Tom said. Too much shame and embarrassment. She's planning to move out of state to be near her sister in Arizona. Part of me felt guilty. Part of me felt relieved. Mostly, I just felt tired of the whole situation. The new HOA board was elected in March, about 2 months after Patricia's removal. 3 new members joined, all of them reasonable people who wanted to maintain community standards without turning into petty tyrants. The new president was a retired accountant named James Murphy, who promised a common-sense approach to enforcement. At the first meeting under the new board, James made a point of apologizing to me publicly for the harassment I had endured. Mr. Hartman's experience with the previous board was completely unacceptable, James said. The HOA exists to serve the homeowners, not to bully them. We're implementing new procedures to ensure equal enforcement of all rules, with clear warnings before any fines are issued. We're also establishing an appeals process that doesn't require hiring a lawyer, and we're reviewing all of the bylaws to eliminate overly restrictive or unreasonable provisions. He specifically mentioned the snow removal bylaw. Given the weather events of this past winter, the board is proposing an amendment to the snow removal requirement. We'll still expect reasonable efforts to clear walkways for safety purposes, but we'll add exceptions for extreme weather conditions, state of emergency declarations, and other circumstances where compliance is impossible or dangerous. Does anyone object to that amendment? The room was silent. Nobody objected. Motion passes, James said, making a note. Mr. Hartman, I want to personally thank you for having the courage to stand up to the previous board's unreasonable behavior. Your actions led to necessary reforms that will benefit everyone in this neighborhood. There was actually applause. I felt my face flush with embarrassment, but I also felt vindicated. The fight had been worth it. Patricia's house sold in April, and I watched from my window as the moving truck arrived. She did not come over to say goodbye, and I did not seek her out. Some endings don't need closure. The new owners were a young couple with a baby, and they seemed friendly enough. I brought over a bottle of wine to welcome them to the neighborhood, and made a point of telling them that the HOA had recently undergone significant changes and was now much more reasonable. That's good to know, the husband said. We were actually a little nervous about buying in an HOA neighborhood because of horror stories we've heard. But everyone we've talked to says this neighborhood is really nice now. I smiled. It is now. It had some rough patches recently, but things are better. That summer was peaceful. I tended my garden, kept my grass at a reasonable height, and didn't worry about petty fines. The new board sent out a monthly newsletter with helpful reminders about community events and upcoming maintenance schedules, but the tone was friendly rather than threatening. It felt like living in an actual neighborhood rather than a police state. In July, I received an unexpected letter from Patricia Henderson. It had been forwarded from her old address to my mailbox. Inside was a handwritten note on plain paper. Dear Marcus, I hope this letter finds you well. I am writing from Arizona, where I have moved to be near family and start over. I have spent the past few months in therapy, working through a lot of issues that I didn't even realize I had. My therapist has helped me understand that I was using the HOA position to try to control an aspect of my life at a time when everything else felt out of control. My marriage was falling apart, my career had stalled, and I felt invisible and unimportant. Being HOA president gave me a sense of power and purpose, but I twisted it into something toxic. I am deeply sorry for the harassment you endured. You were right to stand up to me, and I am glad you did. The person I became as HOA president was not someone I am proud of. I hope you can forgive me, not for my sake, but for yours. Holding on to anger only hurts you. I wish you all the best in your home and your life. Sincerely, Patricia Henderson. I read the letter twice, then folded it and put it in a drawer. I did not respond. I appreciated the apology, but I also knew that Patricia had written it more for her own healing than for mine. That was okay. Forgiveness is complicated, and I was not sure I was ready to fully forgive her yet. But I also was not carrying around anger anymore. The situation had been resolved. Justice had been served. The neighborhood had improved. That was enough. A year after the blizzard incident, I was sitting on my back deck on a warm evening when Tom Richards came over with a couple of beers. "Hey man, I just wanted to tell you something," Tom said, handing me a cold bottle. "Remember when you first moved in and I told you the HOA was pretty strict? I should have warned you more specifically about Patricia. I knew she was targeting people unfairly, and I didn't say anything because I didn't want to get on her bad side. That was cowardly of me, and I'm sorry." "Tom, it's not your fault. Patricia was the one who chose to abuse her position." "Yeah, but if more of us had spoken up earlier, you wouldn't have had to deal with all those fines and stress. You took all the heat by fighting back, and the rest of us benefited from your courage without having to risk anything ourselves. That wasn't right." I took a sip of my beer and thought about it. "I appreciate you saying that, but honestly, I'm just glad it worked out. And I'm glad the neighborhood is better now because of it. That's worth more than any apology." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sun set behind the mountains. The peaks were still snow-capped even in summer, a reminder of that brutal blizzard that had started everything. "You know what's funny?" Tom said. "That blizzard was the best thing that could have happened to this neighborhood. If Patricia hadn't tried to fine you for something so obviously impossible, you might not have fought back. And if you hadn't fought back, she would still be terrorizing everyone." "It's funny how things work out sometimes," I agreed. "Though I could have done without the stress and the legal bills. At least you got reimbursed, and you've got a hell of a story now. The guy who took down a tyrannical HOA president with the help of a TV meteorologist." I laughed. "When you put it that way, it does sound pretty wild." We finished our beers and talked about other things, normal neighbor things like upcoming summer block parties, and whether we should organize a neighborhood garage sale. It felt good to have normal conversations that didn't involve HOA disputes or legal threats. As Tom was leaving, he turned back to me. "Hey Marcus, I know the new board is looking for members. Have you thought about joining? You'd be great at it, and you clearly care about fairness and reasonable governance." I shook my head immediately. "No way. I appreciate the vote of confidence, but I have zero interest in being on the HOA board. I just want to live in my house and not be hassled." "Let someone else deal with enforcing bylaws and organizing neighborhood events." Tom grinned. "Fair enough. Can't blame you after what you went through." That night, I thought about Tom's suggestion. Could I imagine myself as an HOA board member, working to prevent future residents from experiencing what I had gone through? Maybe. But I also knew that I was happy just being a regular homeowner who mowed his lawn, shoveled his driveway when reasonable, and minded his own business. I had fought my fight and won. That was enough. The following winter was relatively mild compared to the previous year's historic blizzard. We got several significant snowfalls, but nothing that required state of emergency declarations or travel bans. Each time it snowed, I shoveled my driveway within a reasonable time frame, usually the same day or the next morning. No fines appeared in my mailbox. No threatening letters. No photographs of alleged violations. It was almost boring in the best possible way. David Preston, the meteorologist who had testified at my hearing, reached out to me in February with an interesting request. He was doing a news segment about HOA disputes and extreme weather, and he wanted to interview me about my experience. I agreed. figuring it might help other people in similar situations understand their rights. The interview aired during the evening news on a Tuesday. David did a great job telling the story, including dramatic footage from the historic blizzard, clips of the neighborhood during the whiteout conditions, and interviews with me and my attorney, Sarah Mitchell. The segment ended with David offering advice to viewers who might face similar situations. HOA rules are not absolute, David said to the camera. When weather conditions make compliance impossible or dangerous, homeowners have rights. Document everything, consult with an attorney if necessary, and don't be afraid to push back against unreasonable demands. Your safety is more important than any bylaw. The segment got a lot of attention on social media and apparently inspired several other homeowners in Colorado to challenge unfair HOA fines related to the blizzard. Sarah Mitchell called me a few days later to tell me she had received half a dozen new clients who had seen the news story and wanted help fighting their own HOA disputes. "You started something, Marcus," she said. "People are realizing they don't have to just accept whatever their HOA demands. They have rights, and sometimes it's worth fighting for those rights." I felt proud of that, though I also felt a little embarrassed by the attention. I had not set out to become some kind of anti-HOA activist. I had just wanted to live in my house without being harassed. In March, I attended the HOA annual meeting, mostly out of curiosity. The new board had been in place for over a year, and I wanted to see how things were going. The meeting was remarkably boring, which was actually a good sign. They discussed routine maintenance issues, approved the annual budget, and took suggestions from residents about community improvements. Nobody yelled. Nobody threatened lawsuits. Nobody accused anyone else of violating obscure bylaws. At the end of the meeting, James Murphy mentioned that they were still looking for additional board members. "We need people who care about the neighborhood, but also understand that reasonable governance requires flexibility and common sense," James said. "If anyone is interested in serving, please talk to me after the meeting." I looked around the room and saw several people nodding, including a few who I knew had been on the receiving end of Patricia's enforcement campaigns. Maybe some good people would step up. As I was leaving, a woman I did not recognize approached me. She was probably in her 50s with graying hair and a friendly smile. "You're Marcus Hartman, right? The one who fought the snow removal fine." "That's me," I said, preparing for either praise or criticism. "I just wanted to thank you. My son bought a house in an HOA neighborhood in Fort Collins last year, and his HOA tried to pull something similar. Not about snow removal, but about yard maintenance during a drought when there were water restrictions. They wanted to fine him for having a brown lawn even though it was illegal to water. He saw your story on the news and realized he could fight back. He got a lawyer, presented evidence about the water restrictions, and the HOA backed down. You helped him, even though you don't know him. So thank you." "I'm glad it helped," I said, genuinely touched. "Nobody should be punished for following the law or doing the right thing." She shook my hand and left, and I stood there for a moment feeling grateful. The whole horrible experience with Patricia Henderson and the blizzard fine had been stressful and expensive, but it had led to positive changes. Not just in my neighborhood, but potentially for other people dealing with similar situations. That felt like victory. By the time spring arrived, life in Meadowbrook Heights had settled into a comfortable routine. The HOA continued its reasonable approach to governance. New families moved into the neighborhood and were welcomed warmly. Community events happened regularly and were well attended. Property values remained stable. I planted tomatoes in my garden, painted my deck, and even hosted a small barbecue for some neighbors. Tom Richards brought his family. The young couple who had bought Patricia's old house came with their toddler. Several other people from the street stopped by. We grilled burgers, drank beer, and talked about normal things like sports and local restaurants and the best hiking trails in the area. Nobody mentioned HOA fines or snow removal bylaws or Patricia Henderson. Those things were in the past, and we were all happy to leave them there. One evening in late May, I was sitting on my back deck watching the sunset when I realized I was genuinely happy. The fight with Patricia and the HOA had been difficult, but it had taught me important lessons. I had learned that standing up for yourself matters. I had learned that rules without reason are just tyranny. I had learned that sometimes you have to fight battles you didn't want to fight, and that winning those battles can make life better not just for yourself, but for others too. I thought about Patricia occasionally, wondering how she was doing in Arizona. I hoped she was getting the help she needed and finding healthier ways to feel important and valued. I had meant what I said in my letter, even though I had never sent it. Forgiveness is complicated, but holding on to anger only hurts yourself. The sky turned pink and orange as the sun dropped behind the mountains, and I raised my beer in a silent toast. To surviving winter blizzards, both literal and metaphorical. To standing up against unreasonable authority. To the helpers and allies who show up when you need them. To David Preston and his expert testimony. To Sarah Mitchell and her legal knowledge. To Tom Richards and the other neighbors who finally spoke up. To the new board members who understood that leadership means service, not domination. And to myself, for having the courage to fight back when it would have been easier to just pay the fine and stay quiet. The meteorologist had testified that it was impossible to shovel during the whiteout, and he had been right. But he had also, inadvertently, testified to something else. Sometimes the impossible becomes possible when you refuse to accept unreasonable demands. Sometimes fighting back against injustice, even small neighborhood injustice, creates ripples that spread far beyond what you can see. I finished my beer, went inside, and started planning my next home improvement project. Something that definitely complied with all the bylaws, because even though the HOA was reasonable now, there was no point in creating unnecessary problems. I had learned to pick my battles, and I had already won the important one. The fine for not shoveling during the whiteout had been dismissed. Patricia Henderson was gone. The neighborhood was better. Justice, in its own small way, had been served. And I was free to live in my house, paint my deck, plant my tomatoes, and enjoy my mountain view without fear of arbitrary punishment. That was all I had ever wanted.